Hello, Margaret. Welcome to the Protect Accent interview.
Hi, Giddy. Lovely to see you this afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you, and it's a pleasure having you on today's interview. It would be lovely if you can introduce yourself, please.
My name is Margeret Ochieng. I'm a business psychologist and a consultant. I currently work in the diversity and inclusion space, that includes research, um, and I'm also a coach. I find this particular topic interesting. I'm a Kenyan accented speaker, as you probably can pick out. So, yeah, so a pleasure to speak to you this afternoon, and thank you for inviting me onto this interview. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a pleasure having you on this interview. Thank you, Margaret. I just wondered, though, why were you interested in coming on to the interview? Have you ever experienced accentism in your career? What was the motivation for coming on this interview today?
Yeah, so I live every day as with my accent, which I absolutely like because it differentiates me from other from other other speakers, and it's the same from speakers who come from the same demographic as me. So when I saw you do this campaign, I thought, how interesting, because accents are everywhere. Everyone has their own, but yet we know that with some accents, there are people who will evaluate some accents more negatively and others more positively than others. And I happen to have one of those that, from my experience, I've had a couple of incidences through the course of my career that have kind of stopped and thought, why is it that way, yet everyone brings a certain accent to the workplace? Why was mine being put down? So that's really why I wanted to speak about this. And also just I would like more accented speakers to put their voices out there, because we don't, most people we hear speaking about things speak about kind of the same way. And if other accented speakers don't hear us speaking out, then those accents are hidden. Then it almost sends the message that you have to speak a certain way for you to earn the right to speak. So part of the reason I'm speaking is because I want to put an accent out there. I want to put an accented speaker out there, just if there's someone who's hiding theirs and thinking I can't do interviews or I can't speak, that they will listen to this as you're doing yourself and hear two accented women having a conversation and recording it. Yeah.
Thank you. But have you ever experienced accentism in your career? Did you ever have any personal experience of being discriminated on based on your accent?
A few. One example I wanted to share was many years ago, I was doing a temporary role with a company. It was a marketing role, and so we were assigned caseloads of clients that we looked after. And I remember one day a client on my caseload rang me up, and as I answered the phone, and I said, "Oh, how can I help you?" He immediately said to me, "Oh, I'd like to speak to somebody else who speaks English." And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because up until that point, I thought I spoke English because I'd been speaking with loads of clients. So I, first I'm confused. I don't know what to do. I'm thinking he's actually joking. He is not joking. He wanted to speak to somebody else. And by someone else who speaks English was someone else who speaks English the way that he does. So I remember calling my manager and just saying, there's one of my clients is on the phone and insists on speaking to someone else who speaks English rather than me. And my manager came on the phone and started speaking to him. Unfortunately, for what he wanted, for the conversation he wanted to have, I was actually the only person who could have that conversation with him, because I'm the person who knew what he wanted. Yeah. And so we spent the whole time on the phone with my manager on a speakerphone, with me writing down what she needs to say and her saying it back to him until that call was finished. Yeah, so I think that's the most memorable one, because up until that point, it hadn't occurred to me that my accent would isolate me from other people in the organization, that someone would choose to speak to someone else and not me based on how I spoke, because they didn't see me. I was on the other end of the phone. Yes, yeah, so that just an example. Yeah.
Well, how did that incident make you feel? Did your manager address it afterwards, or how did it make you feel?
Yeah, so I think the feeling there was surprise, because what surprised me most was the fact that when this call finished, this was an office we were about 15 people sitting in that particular section, and only one person out of those 15 said, "That was appalling. That was terrible. What was that guy on about?" The rest of the people just, I don't know whether they just ignored it, like nothing happened. And that conversation died, and that was the last I ever heard about it. And it got me thinking, how often does this happen to people? And is this ever addressed? Is this how this is normally addressed? And so I think that was the first time I started to think, to be very conscious about the fact that somebody can actually, and that was quite blatant. And I was also wondering, are there other subtle ways in which people will want to exclude you or remove you from an opportunity because you speak a certain way? So that's why I got interested in this subject. And, I've never really explored it until I heard you speaking about it. And I thought, yeah, accents, they are a thing. They really are a thing, yeah.
Thank you for that. That is precisely why the Protect Accent project was initiated, to provide that platform for people who have suffered from accentism to start having these important conversations.
Absolutely.
Because I'm finding that people are very uncomfortable to talk about it, because simply there is no platform for it. There is no organizational policy to encourage that conversation, to initiate the conversation in the first instance. So what did your manager do? What did you feel your manager could have done to help you out in that situation?
Yeah, so I think it's when it first happens, obviously you're confused, your manager's confused, and then there's a client. And so probably at that point, because nobody's ever spoken about this, I don't know whether that's the first time it's ever happened in that team. For me, the fact that the manager came on board and carried on talking to the clients, and me having to write stuff down for them, instead of that, I would have wished that they would have said, "Sorry, this is actually her caseload, and I actually don't know anything to do with it, and I think you can speak to her." That's what I would have wished. But obviously, I think, one, people don't know how to handle these kind of things. People are uncomfortable to talk about it. And that makes it, that's what makes it uncomfortable. So yes, I think managers should be more comfortable to confront, not confront, or challenge clients who will try and put someone down based on their accent. So I don't think the problem there was that, what the problem wasn't that he couldn't understand what I was saying. He didn't complain that I don't understand what you're saying. He just decided he did not want to speak to me. And I think those are two different issues. I can understand you, but I don't want to talk to you. That is outright bias. That's outright discrimination against someone who you haven't assessed them in any other way, apart from the fact that they speak English differently. So yeah, I think managers should be equipped to be able to challenge or stop and or also just set the rules straight, set the record straight. That this is not how we treat our employees, and this is not how we prefer for our clients to treat our employees. These are the best people we've got, and they can serve you. Why can they not serve you? It's a challenge, but I think the fact that we're talking about it means that people should step up to the plate and protect staff when they have been confronted in those ways.
Thank you for that, Margaret. So what about the accented speaker? What can the accented speaker do? Say, for instance, in your case, you were clearly discriminated on based on your accent. Managers didn't do anything about it. But what more, reflecting back now, what more do you think you could have done to bring this to the fore, to the limelight? As an accepted speaker, what can you do?
Yeah, that's where the argument that's where the argument is for me, because I've had people say, oh, people should try and speak more clearly. I'm like, well, if someone doesn't like your accent, it doesn't help whether you speak. They're not challenging the fact that you speak clearly or not. We all have different accents, and I think there is this thing we call the hierarchy of accents. So
absolutely,
it's not just that I don't like the way you speak. It's also that the way you speak reminds me of something I don't like. So there's a bias somewhere that I'm now attaching to your accent. So I've wondered, what if it was a European? What if I had spoken to this guy with, say, a German accent? Would he have said, can I speak to someone else who speaks English? Maybe he would have. Maybe if he has a bias against a certain, or maybe there was a bias there that was that he was picking up an African accent. Was it that? We will never know. As the employee, I haven't got the power at that point to challenge a client and start that argument with them, do I? But my manager is in a position of authority and can gently and tactically challenge somebody who singles out an individual in that way. So the hierarchy of accents is something I think should be explored. Is it accents we have a problem with? Or is it certain accents that we have a problem with? That remains the question. So as an accented speaker, I think it's one thing to be told, speak clearly. Well, if you can speak clearly, most accented speakers know, so they speak very clearly. They speak slowly. They enhance their communication skills, so they make sure they can communicate, because it's one thing to speak and it's another to communicate. So there are people who will speak with the accent that people want them to speak with, but they're just not good communicators. So can you communicate? That involves more than what you say. And all those things need to be taken into account. So an awareness of how you come across and how you sound when you have an accent. Can you communicate? That's your responsibility, is to communicate. Yeah. However, there's all the stuff that have to do with bias, as I've said, which are not the responsibility of the accented speaker. If someone is going to judge you or evaluate you less favorably, then that is the responsibility of the organization or the person that is evaluating you. Part of that problem could be that that person has a listening skill problem. So if I speak to 10 people, 9 of them can understand what I'm saying. So right now, you and I are having this conversation. Say 10 people are listening to us. 9 of them can understand what you and I are saying. 1 person can't. Who needs an intervention? Do we, or is it the person who cannot understand what we're saying? So to entirely say that accented speaker is the one who has to do something is probably unfair, because other people can understand you. If 1 person can't, then maybe that person needs some help with their listening to diverse speakers. Yeah. Yes, so those are just some of the thoughts I had when you asked that question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Margaret. I think personally that the one thing that I would take away from this interview is the different forms that accentism can play out in the work environment. And managers need to be cognizant of this and provide the agency to address it properly.
Absolutely.
To be addressed. Yeah. Thank you for the interview, and thank you.
It's knowing when it's happening.
Yeah.
So does a manager know when somebody has been targeted because of their accent? And how can they then help that person? How can they challenge the perpetrator? And can they support the person who's been targeted? And I think those are the things that are important to people.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to accentism, a lot of it can actually be perpetrated covertly. Yeah. So people can do it without others actually realizing that it's happening, except for the victim.
Exactly.
Except for the victim. But when it plays out like it did in that example that you gave, I mean, that was clear for everyone to see. Absolutely. And it needs to be addressed. So when it is actually perpetrated covertly, the onus is now on the accented speaker to seek for help.
Absolutely.
Go to the organization and say, look, this is what is happening, and make your feelings known. But does the organization have the mechanism to actually address these issues?
Absolutely.
And that is one of the major reasons why the Protect Accent interview was initiated, to bring this to the spotlight and shine the light on it, so that organizations will start realizing that this really needs to be addressed. And with that, we'll wrap up this interview, Margaret.
Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure having you.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.